Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Monica Saini from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today, I am going to discuss on the module Crime Scene Investigation under the Forensic Anthropology paper. After going through this module, you will be able to know what is the meaning of crime, different types of criminal behavior, objectives of crime scene investigation, and you'll be able to know how does the crime scene investigation take place. Crime or criminal act can be stated as an act of misdemeanor, violating or breaching the laws, which makes the offender or wrongdoer liable to the punishment by the governing law. Criminal behavior, it covers a wide range of antisocial activities ranging from act of violence, that is killing of people, robbery, theft, sexual offense, property related offenses, forgery, cheating, drugging and peddling. The criminal acts of such nature falls outside the range of social acceptance, and anyone culpable of such offense and found guilty has to face the punishments. The term investigation is a systematic inquiry, and it is an examination related to some incidents and situation for the purpose of tracing required information. Thus, investigation involves whole examination and scrutiny of facts, traces of information for complete investigation. An investigator is any person who is involved in the whole inquiry or in the process of investigation. So students, first we will study what is crime investigation. Crime scene investigation is often the term relating to the process of discovering, collecting of information, identifying of evidence associated with the investigation of a criminal act or event. It is the systematic process of documenting, collecting, processing, and interpreting physical evidence associated with the alleged crime scene in an effort to conclude the truth following the analysis of event in question. The study of crime scene, therefore, is to identify, investigate, and apprehending the guilty and present him before the law. Responding to a crime scene is a very crucial step in the process of scientific investigation of a case. Crime scene investigators and crime scene specialists are responsible for identifying, securing, collecting, and preserving evidence, which is handed over to the crime laboratory for further confirmation. Now, I will tell you the objectives of crime scene investigation. The primary objective of a crime scene investigation is to find out the necessary evidence in order to nail the criminal or guilty and put an end to the crime. When a crime has occurred, the role of a law or law investigator come into force. The police employee or law personnel initiates by determining whether a crime has been actually committed. If it has been determined that there is no crime involved, or if the crime is one pertaining the civil courts, law enforcement personnel have no responsibility. Therefore, a crime scene investigator's task is to search for events, physical evidence employed before the act of crime scene, during the act of crime scene, and after the execution of crime. The primary goal of crime scene investigation include determining whether a crime was committed or not, obtaining pieces of information and evidences through legal mode, knowing modus operandi of the execution of crime, identifying and eliminating the suspect as a result of testimonial evidence, arresting of prime suspect, and presenting it before the governing law. Who is responsible for crime scene investigation? There are many stages in crime scene investigation. All support one another and each step forms an essential underlying link in order to capture scene of crime without disregarding each step. The first tier of investigative process begins with the first responder. This is typically the police officer who is dispatched to the initial scene. Through the course of his or her response to and the examination and evaluation of the event, if the officer believes that a crime was committed, then that officer finds it necessary to expand his investigation through scientific and lawful mode. Sometimes crime and associated crime scenes are of the minor nature and can be handled by the first responders. The functions of a crime scene investigator usually consist of securing the scene of crime, sketching, photographing, video recording, obtaining information in the form of physical evidence, drawing information from the witnesses and suspects, searching and tracking the suspects using the essential threats, and testifying in the court. Now, I will talk about the classification of crime scene. A crime scene can be classified into primary and secondary crime scene depending upon the location of the crime act. The site of original crime scene act is termed as the primary crime scene, and whereas any subsequent location associated with the crime scene is termed as secondary crime scene. For example, surrounding area around the primary crime scene. Now, I will tell you an example. If a murder has been reported in the bedroom, then all the other adjoining rooms would be termed as the secondary crime locations. Other types of committed crime include physical assault, theft, homicide acts, etc. Crime can also be classified on the basis of situation of the scene of crime, that is, organized or disorganized. It can also be classified on the basis of place or the location of the scene of crime, that is, indoor crime scene, outdoor crime scene, or crime scene where vehicle is placed. Where a crime had been executed and the another basis is kind of criminal behavior involved with the crime, that is active or passive crime. Now, you will be studying the identification and utilization of material source and evidence in investigation of crime. The main goal of any crime scene investigation is to identify, collect, interpret, and reconstruct all the essential physical evidence at the crime scene. A forensic laboratory examines the pieces of threads which aids the prime investigator with the clues in an attempt about to solve the cases. The following are the various type of clues obtained from the examination of material evidence in the investigation of crime. First type of clue is corpus delicti. This is the determination of essential object, body, charred remains of the crime scene or the evidence itself that describes that a crime has been committed and the patterns of the evidence leading to it. Second type of clue is modus operandi. In criminology, the term is applied to signify distinct mode or pattern of executing a criminal act used by the assailant or the criminal. Criminals mostly have their own signature way or behavior pattern of executing any crime. For example, a serial killer have their own peculiar mode of killing their target. Burglars often gain entry inside the houses using the same manner and technique. Third type of cue is linkage of person, scene, and objects. According to the Locard exchange principle, whenever two objects come into contact, a mutual exchange of matter will take place between them. That is, anyone or any object or thing entering a crime scene both leave something behind at the scene of crime and as well as taking something from there. Identification of the suspect. Forensic examination is a process of step which includes recognition, identification, individualization, and reconstruction. Identification of a suspect is done in 3 steps that result in the determination of the source of item of physical evidence, which is then facilitated by the comparison testing. The best example of a unique individualization is fingerprint evidence. Now, I will talk about the identification and examination of unknown substances. The identification and examination of unknown substances and trace evidence is commonly employed in case of physical identification. Identification of drugs, poisonous substances, and even bacteria such as anthrax serve as useful cues. Final step of identification is reconstruction of a crime scene. The crime scene investigator is more interested as to how a crime occurred than individualizing the evidence at the scene of crime. The how of the crime is more important than the who. Material evidence can provide first-hand information to an investigator. Material evidence can frequently provide indirect information or investigative leads. This is the most important and significant use of material evidence in the investigation of any crime. Not every crime scene has individualizing physical evidence in a criminal investigation, such as fingerprints, but every crime scene contains physical evidence that assists the investigator. For example, a footwear impression that shows a manufacturer, size, type of shoe worn by the subject. Investigation of a crime scene is not simply a mechanical process which is handled by the investigators. To process and document a crime scene using step-by-step techniques. It is a dynamic reconstructive process that requires an active participation and making use of deductive reasoning by the scene investigator, who must be aware of the linkage principle of the evidence, use scene analysis and systematic tools and techniques, and be able to come out with the reconstruction of the scene. It is based upon the Locard exchange principle, logic, and draws up the conclusion from the facts and physical evidence examinations to develop investigative leads that will ultimately solve a crime scene. The diagram shows you the important steps to the scientific examination of a crime scene, which includes recognition, identification, individualization, and reconstruction. Now, I will talk about the crime scene procedures. The first step is scene management. Crime scene can be solved by a teamwork and team effort of investigators, of crime scene personnel, and by the combined use of techniques and procedures recognizing the power of crime scenes, physical evidence, records, and witnesses. The four distinctive but interrelated components of crime scene management are information management, manpower management, technology management, and logistic management. The first responders at a crime are usually police officers, fire department personnel, or emergency medical personnel. They are the one who take the first overview and detailed note of the scene of the crime. They must perform their duties and remember that they link victims to suspects to crime scene. The duties of a first responder include determining whether the victim or the assailant still present at the crime scene, searching for and arresting the suspect if still on the scene, securing the scene and ensuring no interference with any foreign object at the location, protecting it with using the barrier tape and other means to secure the scene, noting down and communicating to crime scene investigators all movements and alterations made to the crime scene. Now, I will tell you how the crime scene is secured. The survey of the scene of crime is the preliminary inspection done by the crime scene investigator, having secured a proper plan in place. The crime scene investigator, together with the first responder, will usually perform this scene survey and he will collect all the probable evidences. The survey is the first examination or the orientation which is done by the crime scene investigator. Next step is crime scene survey. With the arrival of crime scene investigator at the crime scene and a suitable plan in a place, a thorough and coordinated investigation takes place. The crime scene investigator, together with the first responder, will usually perform this scene survey and collecting all probable evidence. The following steps and guidelines should be incorporated. First, make use of digital cameras, video makers, and 3D scanners for detailed documentation. Making use of sketches and diagrammatic illustrations wherever required. Noting down of any transient or conditional evidence that requires an immediate protection or processing. Proper procedures and requirements should be followed for collection, preserving, packaging, and evidences, especially if it is of biological nature. The investigator should be aware of alteration or contamination of these areas by the first responder personnel. He should record the initial observation of who, what, where, when, and how. Assess the scene for personal precaution, equipments that will be needed, and notify superior officers or other agencies as required. So students, now you will get to know about the crime scene documentation. Once the preliminary scene survey of the crime scene has been evaluated, the condition should be properly documented. Documentation is the most essential lead in the processing of the crime scene. The purpose of the documentation is to permanently record the condition of the crime scene and its physical evidence. In documentation of the crime scene, there are basically 4 steps for complete documenting, and these steps are note-taking, videography, photography, sketching, and innovation, which are very essential ingredients for this purpose. Taking down the notes makes for the important part of a written record of all the crime scene. The notes are taken well before elapse of much time span to prevent possible memory loss if noting down was delayed. A thorough note taking at the crime scene is crucial before who, what, when, how should be specified. Notification about the necessary date, time, technique of information and information received should be notified. The arrival information, which consists of means of transportation, date and time, personnel present at the scene and any notification should be made. Weather, location, type and condition, major structure should be noted down. The identification of transient and conditional evidence, containers holding evidence of recent activities, clothing, furniture and weapon present should also be noted down. And in most jurisdictions, a body should not be moved or disturbed until the medical examiner has given approval, after which notes can be made of position, lividity, wounds, clothing, jewelry and identification. Assignment to team members regarding all the information from the beginning till the end should be properly handled. Next activity is videotaping the crime scene. Videotaping a crime scene has become a routine documentation procedure. Its acceptances are widespread due to the three-dimensional portrayal of the scene and increased availability of affordable equipment with user-friendly features like zoom lens and compact size. Jury acceptability and expectations have also added to the recognized use of videography in crime scene investigation. Videography of the crime scene should follow the scene survey. Photographing the crime scene is also an important step. The purpose of still photography of crime scene is to provide a true and accurate pictorial record of the crime scene and physical evidence that is present. Still photography records the initial condition of the scene. It provides investigators and others with a record that can be analyzed or examined subsequent to the scene of investigation and serve as a permanent record for legal concerns. Photography of crime scene is normally done immediately following the videography of the scene or after the preliminary scene survey. There are basically three types of photographs taken to the document the crime scene, and these include overviews, mid-views and close-up. Overview shots are the widest possible views of the entire scene. If the scene is indoors, this include view of all rooms with photo taken from each corner, and if a boom is present, overhead of the outside of the building where the crime happened, including photos of all entrances and exits, views of the building showing its relation to the surrounding structures, and photos of any spectators at the scene. Whereas mid-range photo comes next. These shots show key pieces of evidence in context, so the photo includes not only the evidence but also its location in a room and its distance from other piece of evidence. The third type of photograph include close-ups, which show any serial numbers or identifying characteristics. For these pictures, the crime scene investigator uses a tripod and professional lighting techniques to achieve the best possible detail and clarity. Those photos in a particular will provide the forensic lab with views to assist in analyzing the evidence. The next step of crime scene investigative procedure is sketching. The final task in documentation of crime scene is sketching. The prime investigator and personnel should keep freehand drawing of the crime scene. Sketching of the crime scene is not difficult, but it requires some organization and it requires planning by the investigator in order to assure accurate sketch results. Basically, two types of sketches are made during the crime scene investigation: rough sketches and final or finished sketches. And two types of perspectives are used in the making of crime scene sketches. These are overhead or bird eye view and the elevation or side view sketch. Proper layout of the scene should be made with the measurements. Crime scene search is an attempt to make note of essential item of evidence and is done to orient things before the documentation begins. After scene documentation completed, a more efficient and effective search method technique must be selected. If any new items of evidence are found, then they must be subjected to the same documentation tasks completed earlier. In order to determine the best method, an area of entire space should be taken into consideration. Most commonly employed search methods are geometric patterns. The 6 patterns are link, line, grid, zone, wheel or ray, and spiral. Each of them is better advantaged for outside or indoor premises. Before any intensive crime scene search is done, care must be taken to instruct the members of the search party. Now you'll get to know about the collection and preservation of physical evidence. After the completion of crime scene documentation and intensive search of the scene for physical evidence, collection and preservation of the evidence must begin. One individual should be designated as the evidence collector to ensure that the evidence is collected, packaged, marked, sealed, and preserved in a consistent manner. Care should be maintained that no item of evidence should be left, lost, or interfered. As such, there is not a particular chain that should be followed in order for the collection of the evidence, but consideration must be made to the nature or texture of the evidence. If items are moved and new evidence is discovered, documentation must proceed immediately. The next activity is crime scene deconstruction. It is the process of determining or eliminating the events that occurred the crime scene by analysis of crime scene evidence, the location and position of the physical evidence, and the forensic laboratory of the physical evidence. It involves the scientific crime investigation, interpretation of patterned evidence at the scene, laboratory testing of the physical evidence, systematic study of related case information, and the logical formulation of a theory. Crime scene investigation is based upon scientific experimentation and experience of the investigator. Its steps and stages follow basic scientific principles, theory formulation, and logical methodology. It incorporates all investigative information with physical evidence analysis and interpretation of reasonable explanation of the criminal activity and related events. Before a detailed analysis of the evidence is accomplished, a possible explanation or conjecture of the actions involved in the crime scene may be formulated. It also includes the hypothesis formulation. The additional accumulation of data is based on the examination of physical evidence and continuing investigation. Scene examination and inspection of evidence must be done. Interpretation of blood stain and impression pattern, gunshot residue patterns, fingerprint evidence, and analysis of trace evidence will lead to the formulation of a reconstruction hypothesis. After a hypothesis has been developed, additional testing or experimentation must be done to confirm or disprove the overall interpretation or specific aspects of the hypothesis. This stage includes comparison of samples collected at the scene with known standards, microscopic examination, chemical analysis, and other testing. A reconstruction can only be as good as the information provided. Information may come from crime scene, physical evidence, records, statements, witness accounts, and known data. The information gathering processes described above and its use in crime scene reconstruction and as a result allow its successful use by investigators. If a crime scene is properly investigated with systematic methodology, then it will provide the means for completing criminal investigation and resolving the case. So students, let us see what we have studied. To reconstruct a scene of crime is necessary in tracing and narrowing down the chain of events that leads to the criminal act. The crucial evidence, it play a pertinent role in linking the suspect to the victim and providing support or contradiction of the various elements of the incident. The steps which are incorporated in the investigation of crime scene, they include arriving at the scene by first responding the officers, documentation of the scene, processing of the crime scene and processing of the equipments which were used in the crime, and finally the completion and the recording of crime scene investigation. Thank you.